Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live stream to cover topics related to digital transformation. Today, we're going to cover a topic that is really exciting for me to chat about. So, and hopefully, you enjoy it too. This is a really interesting and can be a complex topic, very interesting topic for sure. And that topic is breaking silos, ERP success across complex organizations. So, we're going to talk about how to handle multinational and complex and diverse multi-business unit sorts of organizations, some of the nuances and complexities that are unique to those types of organizations, and we'll talk about some of the trade-offs and pitfalls along the way as it relates to that. So I'm excited for our guest, who I'll introduce here in just a moment. But before I do, just a real quick introduction of me. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO at Third Stage Consulting, and we're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach the third stage of digital transformation success. So we help them with their digital strategy, their software selection, as well as their implementation planning, and then implementation program management and change management as well. So it's a little bit about me and what our company does. This interview that we're doing today, this live interview, is going to become part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast. So we do these core interviews live every Tuesday, and then we edit it, we add more content to it, and then we release it as a formal podcast episode that streams to all different sorts of platforms, audio and video. And you can find those past episodes at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also subscribe to the podcast at that same website. So check out transformationgroundcontrol.com when you get a moment. And then last but not least, we are going to have I've got a list of questions I'm going to start with for our guests, but I encourage you all to chime in and provide your questions and comments along the way. That's what makes it a lot more fun. If there's anything you want to ask our guest or any comments you want to make as it relates to what we're talking about, we'd love to hear your feedback. You can drop any comments or questions you have at any time in the chat. We're keeping an eye on all the chat streams across all the platforms we're streaming to here today. So we'll see those questions as they come in. And speaking of the chat, if you don't mind, in the meantime, just drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from. We tend to draw a global audience, so always love to see where everyone's joining from here today. And I believe our guest and I today are on different continents due to travel and whatnot here this week. So I'll share in a moment where I'm from. I'm from Denver, Colorado, I'm in London, UK right now. I'm not living here, but here for business, and based in Denver. So love to hear where you're all joining from too in the chat. And you can use that same chat to ask questions. So again, all that being said, today's topic, breaking silos, ERP success across complex organizations. Today's guest is actually a past client of Third Stage, Walter Kolodziey. Thank you for being here today, Walter.
Well, thanks, Eric. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the dialogue today. A little background about myself, as Eric mentioned. I'm an IT executive at heart. You know, I've been in the industry for more years than I actually should admit to. I've been across multiple verticals: the healthcare industry, distribution, manufacturing, software development. Spent a lot of years in the software development side. My roles have been multifaceted, all the way from just at the director level, operations, to senior executive, CIO, VP of IT across these different verticals. Some of my strong points, I believe, are the ability to bring people together, bring organizations together, parts of organizations to focus on a single goal. Most of the time, those single goals are across different business units, different geographical units, different cultural units. One of the things that you'll hear from me a lot today is culture and sponsorship. It's really important when you're doing any type of change, so to speak, and not really just an IT change or a technology change, but any type of business change, is focus and understand your cultural differences, especially when you're looking at different geographical locations. I've spent a lot of time with organizations that have multiple units across North America, specifically up into Canada, down into Mexico. And you would think that specifically with Canada, forget all the communication and all the stuff you hear now about tariffs and stuff, but just in general, the people are different, even though we interact, they speak English, speak French, but their cultural differences are significant when you get down into the nitty gritty. What I like to share with my people when I'm working with them is make sure that we focus on that, as I mentioned, but we also focus on communications, not just downstream to the staff who's doing the work, but upstream to the sponsorship and leadership. Whether anybody on this podcast is one of those sponsors or one of those on the governance boards to help drive some things, it's tremendously important that you have a very, very strong communications plan in your project plan. It's probably, I've told people, it's probably the most difficult piece of it. It's important to understand what's happening at the organizations that you're, the business units within an organization that you're trying to transform or change. But if you can't communicate and get people on board, you'll start losing the team, the project, the people, and everything along those lines. As Eric, I've listened to a lot of the podcasts that he's done or just his communication, and we all know that a very high percentage of ERP or software business transformations, migrations, implementations, pick your poison, fail. And I've come to find out, I've just very close to one that's just failed, in fact, from the outside as a observer and a consultant, that the reason why they failed is because of executive sponsorship and communications. So that's probably again one of the most important things.
So that's really interesting, because you've been a CIO for a long time. You've worked on a lot of different IT and ERP initiatives over the years. And it was interesting, just in your introduction, right away you're gravitating not to something technical, but to something very soft when you talk about culture and sponsorship and communication, general change management type stuff. What got you there? I know you said you listened to this or to my podcast and my stuff, but there has to be something in your experience that led you there, and kind of what makes that top of mind for you based on your experience?
Well, as I mentioned, failure, and failure hurts, because especially if you're vested in something and you believe you're doing a great job, but sometimes things are out of your control per se, because you can build the best plans you want, and whether it's take any one of the phase of a project plan, and I'm old school when I listen to that. When I talk about that stuff, there's certain things that you need to do and you need to manage. And it took me a while to understand how important communication was. Again, not just to the sponsors or the executive team that's charged you with doing this, but across all facets of the organization. And just a key point is communication is important not only to just the team and the people involved in the project and in the transformation, but also to the people outside of it, the everyday people who are only going to be affected by the end product. They're not involved in if you take a manufacturing facility, there's a lot of people on the lines that are doing the manufacturing or distribution or warehousing that aren't really part of the transformation or project. But it's important to have a communication plan to be able to let them know what the status of things are also. Because when you start, what I found, and it's happened to me before, what I found is when you don't communicate with at that level, a lot of the uprising comes from the people who don't understand really what's going on. It's just like in your personal life. If you're not communicating with your family, friends, peers, so to speak, they make assumptions on things, and then they make bad assumptions sometimes because they're not fully versed in it. As far as the cultural differences, and Eric and I had this conversation a month ago or so about one of the groups that I worked with. It was a company built on acquisitions. Okay. And the acquisitions, and I don't mean this any type of negative connotation at all, but the acquisitions were primarily mom and pop type shops in the manufacturing space. And it took a while. It took a while for us to really grasp the fact that some of the people that critical people in some of these business units, manufacturing plants, and I'm talking smaller ones, maybe 40 people at the plant or not, but they've been doing what they've been doing for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and they've been doing it a certain way. Now you're coming in as an outsider. Theoretically trying to help, but the change you're affecting is critical. And you just don't understand the culture that they've never changed. We found some people that never used a PC. They were now supposed to use some type of automated product, whether it's a scan gun or a tablet or something like that. And they just, I wouldn't say that they couldn't do it. It's just that they couldn't get to doing it. If people understand that, they just had this barrier, and that surprised us because anybody in the technology field, like I'm assuming most of the people on the call today or on the podcast, and I know myself and I know Eric, we've been dealing with technology our careers. So to us, it's second nature. It's like, oh, duh type of thing. But to some people, it's just, it's foreign, even in today's society where everything is either on your iPhone or your Android device or on a PC or everything. Even your cars today there's automation within them that a lot of people don't even use. But that cultural change was really a shock to me. That cultural difference was a shock to me early on, not early on in my career, but probably halfway through my career, when it really became prevalent that you've got to manage, that you've got to understand the people, not just the process. Organization I worked with, one of their mantras was people, performance, and profit, 3 Ps. And none of the 3 were most important. They were all as important, because if you can't successfully manage and drive all 3 of those, you're not going to succeed. You may succeed short term, but you're not going to succeed long term.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting, because you look at all the cultural nuances between different regions of the world. It's probably the most obvious one: different languages, different home cultures that people are growing up with. But then even within the same regions, within the same industries, very similar companies, otherwise, you could still get pretty significant cultural differences. And certainly in the case study or the use case you're talking about that you and I worked together on, there was a lot of that where there was just different nuances from the acquisitions, not only regional or geographic based cultures, but just like you said, mom and pop mentalities versus big corporate performance driven mentality. Those are 2 different cultures.
And one of the important things along those lines, and you sort of, you've touched on it a little bit in either one of our conversations or earlier today, is the sponsorship or the governance, who's running the whole thing. It's extremely important that whoever those are, whatever layer of the organization are assigned that responsibility, whether it's the CEO, CFO, directors, or even at, managers or leaders, if they're given that authority and responsibility, that they understand the cultural differences also. And they're typically embedded in that culture. So it's sometimes difficult to have them focus on it. It's easy for an outsider to see that, but it's also difficult for an outsider, even if they're part of the business. In my case, a couple of them, I was part of the business. I wasn't a consultant or anything, I'm not one to say that IT should be running a large, and running is a big, sort of a nebulous term, but running a large transition like this, I think it needs to be somebody outside of the group, but they need to be able to communicate and support the changes and support those changes throughout the implementation change, whatever you want to call this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's super Super interesting. I want to come back to another follow-up question on that in just a second. But first, I want to turn to the audience real quickly and just say hello to some people that have chimed in here. Connor from LinkedIn says, "Hey, Eric, glad to join." We have see Darian joining from LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. Darian's excited for the conversation. We've also got Mohammed joining from Iran. Kuldeep joining from UK. Hello, thanks for joining here today. And then we also have Ash on YouTube joining from Yumal Kuwait in the UAE. So thank you all for being here today. One thing you were talking about that is really interesting is just coming out of the gates in this conversation. Quite frankly, it's pretty rare to have an IT career professional that's been in the IT space for a long time to think first about culture, strategy, communications, all the non-tech soft stuff that you just described. How did that differ from how you viewed things earlier in your career? I think you alluded to something along the lines of it took you a while to figure this out in your career. Was there like a tipping point or something, a milestone in your career or a specific learning that led you to think, hey, maybe I'm not just an IT guy. Maybe I'm more than that. Maybe it's about
and thanks for the question. It's kind of a great question. Number of years ago, and again, I won't put any years on my career because it'll date myself. But earlier in my career, I joined an organization that was going through a software upgrade. But it was one of these things that they were so far behind in their versions and mods and updates from the vendor, and it was Microsoft, it was Dynamics. They were so far behind, and they did so many internal modifications that there were some new features in the product that would be great for the organization to use. Okay, and so it was a re-implementation. It turned out to be a re-implementation. It wasn't an upgrade. Okay, which is totally different. Anybody who's involved with this understands upgrade is totally different than a re-implementation or an integration or anything else we do. And I was brought on to do the upgrade because of some past experience I had, and it was very, very clear to me relatively soon. And I had an advantage in this organization because I had a close friend of mine who had actually worked for me previously at a different company that was running one of the business units. Okay, and he was an IT professional that transitioned into operations management. So he had a great understanding of both sides of it. And we were struggling when I first came on just to, not me personal, but the project was struggling just because of the reluctance and the understanding of the staffs that we're not changing software, so why are we changing anything, if that makes any sense? They just couldn't get under the understanding that they would need to change business processes and change business practices, not just change the look of a screen or the way something like that, because of the features and functionality. And there was a lot of reluctance there. And it wasn't that they didn't know the software, or they weren't technically savvy. It's just that they didn't understand, and the people who had the positions prior to me at that organization always would defer to them on changes. Tell me what you want and we'll make it happen. That drove all the customizations. Similar to the one that Eric and I worked on together. Tremendous amount of internal customizations over the years that to either roll them out or change the process. That's what ultimately was one of their downfalls, if there was a downfall, was that. So it was the issue of just asking the people what they wanted, but not giving it to them, working with them on solution sets. That was a culture change. Previously, it was okay. We in IT years ago was saying, okay, here's your software, use it, and we'll help you use it, but you use it the way it is, sort of one of those axioms that I've heard said, we're from corporate, we're here to help. And that makes everybody run out of the room and with their hair on fire type of thing. But that helped me understand that I had to be a business partner with the units and their cultural aspects. And I had to change my thinking. And I had to help my team change their thinking too, because the majority of them were used to the same thing of, okay, we're going to come in, we're going to talk, and then we're going to design it the way we think it works, and then you're going to use it. Well, that's not how it works today, because a lot of the stuff that we do, and it's a lot of the stuff that is technology proficient today, and then across any industry, I've heard people say that, oh, well, my granddaughter is doing this on her same thing on her iPad at home, and she can do it better and faster. Well, that's the challenge we have moving forward. Is there's so much technology out there, it's difficult to bridge that gap. That there is a better way, and no, you can't just put 100 iPads on the floor and hope they all work together or do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's another important cultural dimension too, or a cultural difference that you get in different types of organizations. You just mentioned another one, which is age or demographic of education level. All those things are kind of can be subcultures within the same organization, or different cultures across different companies, different parts of the world. And like I said, even in the same industry, same part of the world, same size company, all that stuff, you could still have different cultures just based on what you just said. One has a younger workforce with different technology, and the other one has an older workforce with AS400 green screen type stuff, and those create and influence the cultures in very different ways.
Yeah, and I see, I'm watching the questions that are coming off to the right-hand side here, as you mentioned, and this sort of points to one of the questions. I don't know if I'm going out of line or whatever here.
No, I'll pop it on the screen once I see which one you're asking here.
Yeah, it's how early in an integration or transformation do you think cultural assessment should happen, and who should own that piece? Leadership, HR, change management. It's a great question. I think that it should happen. This is the easy way out of it. It should happen as early in the project as possible. But it should be part of the project plan. It should be just as you're going out and interviewing from an operational standpoint, how the widgets are made, how the software is developed. You should be having interviews with selected people throughout the organization, and just try to understand through the affected part of the organization, and just try to get to know them, so to speak. I'm a proponent of, when you build a project team, you use, and I use the terminology best and brightest out of the different functional business units to be part of that project team in some manner. Ideally, you'd like them to be 100% focused on them, but most businesses can't afford or will not afford. That's two different answers: cannot and will not afford to pull their best and brightest out, because the human capital plan for any transformation is important for not only during the project, but what they're going to be doing after the project is done. It's important to have people understand where they're going to be, because a lot of people think that technology is coming in and I'm going to be out of a job. That's not 100% accurate, but it does happen in some instances. But I think, to answer the question, that should be part of the evaluation from an operational and technology current state, how we run things, how we do things, and what we use to do it, to the people that are doing it. And they should be two separate verticals in my area. And as far as who should own it, I think the project team should. My personal opinion is, I think the project team should own it, because they know what questions to run. The other people that you've mentioned here, leadership, HR, change management, they're all critical in the process, because leadership's got to provide the staff that you're talking to for not just the technology evaluation, but the cultural evaluation. They've got to know that they have your support to not do their jobs at times, because they're going to be pulled off the floor to do things. And sometimes, if they're based on piecework or productivity, it could impact that. So leadership has to be supportive of that. HR has to provide, personally, I've asked HR to give me backgrounds on the people who are going to be involved in it, so I understand where they've been in the organization, where they've come from outside the organization, because you really don't, you want to know if you're talking to somebody who has been in their job forever, or somebody who has moved through the organization and had different experiences and understanding of different parts of it.
Unknown caller.
Sorry about that. I'll get rid of that
Right.
real quick. And then as far as change management is critical, as far as I'm concerned, always critical, because it's a tracking mechanism. Okay, it's going to hold the team, the transition team, accountable, so to speak. It holds you accountable to what you're doing, and it helps you communicate, and also holds the business accountable. Okay, so change management is part of where do we want to change the people that you've given to me. I've had instances, and I think when we worked with Eric, we wanted to have backgrounds on everybody that he was going to put on our project, and not only just from a technical background, but from a interpersonnel skill set background. I've been in implementations where the business is provided, here's your team from the business to do this. And it's very hard, but we've been in situations and different things that we've had to say, we don't need this person, and we don't want this person anymore because they don't fit with the team. So we need somebody else. So that's why HR needs to be involved, because that could cause some issues. That's why the interview process is critical. But I think it should be run by the project team.
Yeah, I totally agree. You don't necessarily want it or need it to be something that's external to the project or run by a separate team. You can have experts that are people that know change really well, really good at it, but they should be part of the team. And certainly the faces of change, the agents of change, should be that core team.
And when you're doing a data gathering, you're doing your evaluations, every group that does it has a process to do that. And when I mean group, I mean consulting group, internal, external, however you want to call it, but they all have their methodology. So you want to keep that methodology and that process and the format as similar as possible, from not only just a technical review, but from a human capital review also, so that you're looking at the same formats for informations. If you have an outside entity do it, like let's say HR did the interviews from a cultural perspective, their output may be totally different than the output that you're used to seeing, and going to bundle up for the executive team, for the sponsorship team, to be able to review. Because remember, what I mentioned earlier is communication is not just critical downstream to the team and to the business unit you're working with, but it's just as critical upstream to the sponsors, to the executive team, to the leaders of the different business units or functional units that you're working with. If you're going to go in and evaluate a manufacturing facility, let's say a quality control part of it, you want to make sure that you're communicating with the management of that quality control group also, so that they're part of, at least when their people come to them and say, hey, what this, that, or the other thing, that they're involved in the communications.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to turn to a couple other audience comments and questions here. Fado sends a comment here saying, currently in a complex organization, implementing SAP spearheaded by IT. So thank you for your comment there. Trying not to cover your face there, Walter, but bear with me. I'll be right back with you. And then want to say hello to Mohammed on LinkedIn, saying good morning all. And thank you for being here. Ryan on LinkedIn says good morning all. And one other question I wanted to ask you, in sort of shifting gears a little bit here, is related to alignment. You talked a little bit about alignment at the beginning of the conversation here, and and I know the project that you and I worked on together, there was issues with alignment, not only culturally, like you've been describing, but also just more sort of the strategies and the overall business needs of the different business units within an organization. What are some of the lessons learned or tips you have for companies that are trying to either ensure that you maintain that alignment, or if you don't have it, you get it up front somewhere before you get too far down the path of trying to attempt a change like this?
Well, I think if I understand the question, Eric, it's alignment on the end goals. It's the objective. It's where you want to be at the end of the day, so to speak. And it's critical that that communication can be drafted by the project team or the consulting group or the implementation group, whoever's doing it. But it's got to come from. I've always advocated that it comes from the highest senior level person in the organization downstream, so that they understand that what we're trying to obtain here, what we're trying to drive for, is coming from the top down. It's not from the consulting group, because again, outsiders are typically frowned upon when they're saying, hey, you've got to do it this way. The overall goal and objective alignment is such as we're streamlining parts. We want to make sure that all of our parts are, even though the one business that I worked with manufactured items, bathtubs, for lack of a better way to put it, multiple different acquisitions manufactured them. But as you can imagine, as they were mom and pop shops, each one of the parts were called different things, were numbered different things, even though they were identical, or supplies, a type of steel or a type of epoxy was same thing, even sometimes purchased from the same vendors, but in their business system, they were named different things. So one of the objectives here was to streamline that as much as possible. So from a purchasing perspective, from a ordering perspective, from a sharing of resource perspective, if I called it A, you called it A, type of thing. Now you can do a lot of things with technology nowadays to have cross-identify these things, alternate part numbers, so to speak. But that type of alignment is critical to come from the top down, from a human capital, perspective. But we're going to change some things, change some people's roles and responsibilities, but we're going to try to make that as similar across an organization as possible. And the reason for that is because one organization I worked with had 40 different locations, and some of these locations were difficult to source human capital, source employees, just because of locations. And some of it was pay scale, but some of it was location, in the boondocks, so to speak. But as similar as we had, functions and products, it was easier. It would make it easier in times of need to port people from one organization to another, short-term, long-term, permanent. And if we had that alignment with the staff to understand that, so there's growth for them. There may be a leadership role in Washington State, and I'm in North Carolina, and if there's a leadership role in Washington State that fits my capabilities, it's easier for me to go there and apply for that and try to get there. If there's similarities across the business, even in the names of things or the way we do things. So that type of alignment. But for me, it's critically important to start at the top and come down. And there can be additional communications at different layers of the organization coming downstream. But initially, that communication needs to come from the highest person or the designated highest person in the organization.
Yeah. It's a good point. And, in today's day and age of decentralized management and servant leadership and all that, kind of buzzworthy stuff in management school and in management schools of thought right now, it's not quite as cool as it used to be to talk about sort of top down. I don't want to say command and control in a bad way, but sometimes you can perceive that as command and control. It seems like it's not taught in the same prominent way it used to be. But there's something to be said for that approach where you have that clarity of vision at the top. You don't just rely on your hundreds or your thousands or tens of thousands of employees to do whatever they want. You've got to have that sort of clarity from the top. And I think that's the
Yeah,
nuance that I think gets lost.
yeah, and it at least from my perspective, you'll always hear me talk about a couple different things, and one that keeps coming up is communication plan. Okay, communication, and communication can and should be able to come from any parts of the team. Okay, as appropriate. Okay, but it's absolutely critical to make sure that the people who are involved, the people who are getting that communication, understand that it's supported upstream just as much as it's supported downstream. And the way that I found that out is that initially in the project, the communication comes from the top. Then it can start to feed its way down to the appropriate areas. But what I've always tried to do is someplace in here, and not on a like, okay, here's the once a month thing from the president of the company, but periodically in there, there's something coming down from the top down that touches on something, some critical milestone or critical event that shows the masses that the executives are still involved. Okay, it's not like they said it once and then we'll never hear from them again because they're busy. And then they're the ones who are going to be complaining that it's not right. So you try to keep that consistent, alignment, is a word that you could use here from the top down that says, yes, I'm involved, I'm listening, I get the communications, and congrats, or this is a great job, or we need to do this better, because again, you've got to communicate both the good stuff and the bad stuff too. You can't just wash it out and say everything's great, because anybody who's been involved in one of these initiatives, so to speak, understands that there's going to be pieces in it that you're going to fail. It's not going to end up the way you want it to be, and you're going to have to regroup and change or realign or do some things. So it's important to communicate both the good with the bad from the top, middle, and the bottom. So it's back to that communication process. You can't. A mentor of mine years and years ago said 99% of the time you can't over communicate. You just have to be aware that you will over communicate sometime or another, but you can never over communicate.
Right. And if you do occasionally, by the way, it's not a bad thing.
No,
but I've yet to meet a project team member that said, you know what, we really over communicated. We should have communicated a little less. It's usually the total opposite, no matter how much they think.
Yeah, the only caveat with that is the message itself. You just have to be careful with the message. You can overdo bad messaging.
True. Like if
so
you're going to lay people off or something like that.
Yeah. So you just have to be careful of that. But I agree 100%. You can't over communicate. Some people, hey, it's human nature. I mean, some people don't do a very good job of managing their inbound communications, whether it's text, whether it's email, whether it's whatever it is. So some things get lost in the shuffle. So a while back, I had the conversation with a person who was doing a piece of a project who didn't think we should communicate as much as we would. So we did a little survey, and some people weren't even reading his emails because they had so many other things to do. So the less he communicated, the more chance of missing the email was. And it's important that you get that communication out and change it just enough so it's not, change the format, change the timing, change the sequence of things you're gonna communicate. So a lot of people, myself included, and I'm sure a lot of people on the podcast here, if I get an email as an example from you, Eric, once a week about a project we're working on, and the first paragraph is always the same,
right?
Odds are I'm not going to read the rest of it. Oh, it's just the same stuff. Now, so if you change it around, if you change it around a little bit, where you grab the attention of the people, they're more apt to read that. But more is better in this instance. Plus, you don't want to be you don't want to be on the end of the stick that you never told me.
Right. That's true. And certain people, you can't have a one size fits all strategy either. I mean, some people are going to respond to emails or read emails. Some aren't. Some are just going to absorb information better verbally or visually.
Yeah, we've all been in situations where whether we've been in a call like this for an hour and it just happens we get 50 emails and it's going to take us a while to go through that, and someone's going to get a little upset you didn't respond in time. You didn't respond to them, to something critical. So it's important that sometimes you just keep it up and keep it up. And, unfortunately, it's the shotgun approach, but you just keep pushing it out there, changing the message enough so that people don't think it's the same message. Did I read this one before? Yeah, I think I did, and just delete it or put it in the bit bucket, so to speak.
Right. Now, you were talking about a moment ago, you were talking about, messaging that has to come from the top down. And I want to come back to that whole, I guess I'll call it management style, but I want to kind of shift into decision-making style here as well. But when we look at our clients that are like the company you worked for that we helped you with a few years ago, any company that's grown through mergers and acquisitions, and especially if they've grown through, or even if they've grown organically, certainly if they have operations that are diversified in different countries and or different product lines. One of the things that we see with a lot of our clients, probably most of our clients in those cases, is that the executives have this utopia vision of how things could be. They think, okay, what if we all start acting like one company, which on the surface sounds great, right? Like, let's act like one company. Let's have one set of part numbers, like you said, or one nomenclature for naming parts. Let's consolidate our suppliers. Let's consolidate our systems. Let's move to a common set of business processes, and think of all the money we could save and how much more efficient we'll be. And, the benefits in the business case usually looks pretty good. But when the rubber meets the road, it's a lot more difficult to do that than it sounds. What has your experience been as far as finding that right balance between that sort of utopia of one common company, one common platform, tool set, processes, all that stuff, versus let's go buy these companies and let them be decentralized and independent or somewhat independent? How have you found success navigating that trade-off or that continuum that you've got to navigate?
Well, there's a couple different answers to this, I guess. Maybe not different answers, but different views of this. And I'll start at the structural perspective, I guess, is what I've always tried to do is to make sure as we're building our teams, okay, and the different, let's say, make it easy, logistics, shipping and receiving. Every facility, every manufacturing facility has some shipping and receiving. They got to receive parts to build. They've got to ship out the end product. How you do that can be tremendously different based on the culture and the way a company is organized and the way a company is built up and their current technology and their current people. Okay. So one of the objectives is to streamline that and make it efficient as possible. What I found to do is to, when you're building your team from these different locations, I mentioned earlier that we had 40, 50 physical locations. You're not going to be able to bring in 40 to 50 logistic leads and try to understand. So you try to go through your surveys and understand the business unit that's doing it most efficiently today, and bring in people from the other one or two business units that are not as efficient and bring them in and have them communicate and be part of the solution set, identifying the solution set and the constraints of the new product that you're going to implement. And we found that the best way to do that is to have them hash out a solution set, visit both sides of the equation, so to speak, go to one plant, go to another. And then if they can't agree, which sometimes happens, we don't want to change, you've got in your structure that you should build for your as you're building out your plan, you should have an organizational structure associated with that of responsible who's responsible for logistics, so to speak. Okay. And then drive that change up to that person to help make the change. Okay. So that's how you get through that. And if that person just can't, and I found that we've all found this, somebody just doesn't want to make a decision because they don't want to go ahead and upset the two ways on it. You've got a path to be able to drive it up to the next layer. Okay. And somewhere along there, and this is where it's critical that you get the support of the executive team and the sponsor, that they've ultimately got to make a decision based on directionally where the business wants to go. It may cost more and hurt more to change to a different way of doing something. But if the end goal is best for the business and the vision for the business at the executive team, that they don't always articulate their vision very well. We all understand that. I've done that myself. I'm sure anybody who in a senior leadership role has looked back and said, I could have communicated that a little bit better. They don't always articulate that well, but they have to have the ultimate decision if the staff can't come to agree with the decision. Because sometimes staff doesn't want to say, do it this way, because they'll be held accountable for it, and they don't want that accountability. And I get it. I understand that. But it's got to be driven up. And that's to me how we get that alignment when you start working in a leadership role or a directional role. And if they can't agree on changes or ways to do things, it's got to have a layer to go up, because the consultant group, and I'm sure, Eric, you've been in this many times, myself, even if a consultant group, if I'm part of the organization, I'm not going to be the one to absolutely tell a logistics group, you have to do it this way. I'll help them decide it based on the technology, current state and future state. I'll help them understand the value proposition, so to speak, of doing it a way. It may be painful today, but downstream it will. But I'm not going to say you have to do it this way. That's got to come out of the business units, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, and you were talking, you were sort of touching on the concept of consultants and just outside vendors in general, whether they're consultants or the software vendors, any other technical partners. How have you handled vendor management, or what are some of the tips that you have for people in terms of managing those outside parties and making sure they don't manage you?
Well, it's important to have strong leadership internally to do that. And sometimes you have to change those interfaces, so to speak. But part of it goes back to the ability to monitor and manage and change the vendor components, so to speak. Not change not change third stage, so to speak, but go to third stage and say, hey, this person is not gelling with the group. He's trying to drive the group. He's not being collaborative, so to speak. He's not listening. Right. He's got it in his mind, which may end up being the right way to do it, but he's got it in his mind, you have to do it this way. And he's trying to convince them without getting them on board. So it's important that you go ahead and you monitor that, and you ask the team's involvement. And sometimes in a longer term implementation, a longer term transition, the vendor group or the consultant group builds relationships with the team, okay, that's doing it. And that's good. Sometimes it's good because you want them to be able to work together. But what I say, the other side of it is that sometimes you don't get the honest answers out of your team because they're in they like the consultant group, for lack of better. They like person A. He's a nice guy. He's only doing his job, so I'm not going to talk negative about him. So you've just got to watch and manage, and you've got to ask the tough questions. And you've got to ask, and that's to the people that are involved directly with the consultant groups who are in the field or on the floor, so to speak. Is he doing his job? Is she doing her job? How does she interact? Is she helping you understand where we're going as opposed to telling you where we're going, which is two totally different things.
How do you navigate that though when you have a team of people, some are more experienced or more sophisticated, more technically mature, whatever you want to call it. Some are more sophisticated than others. So in other words, you have some that just have never been through this before and they don't really understand or know what the right answer is, quote unquote. And so they're going to defer to someone like a third stage and say, well, third stage, the guy from third stage thinks that we should do this, so we might as well just do it because I don't know, I don't have a better answer. So how do you navigate that to where it's almost like not a learned helplessness, but although we do see that at times, or it's almost it is learned helplessness.
Well, there's a couple methods that I've used, and part of that is to make sure that the staff understands that they're important. They understand that they're on the team because they're important. They're on the team because they've got domain knowledge, they've got technical knowledge, they've got interpersonnel skills. Because I put people on teams that are just able to be part of a team, may not have the technology behind them or the business savvy behind them or the manufacturing knowledge, but they're able to be part of a team and they can learn. And they know that they're important to do that. You have sidebar conversations and you watch, you become involved. And it's really, from my perspective, running projects, there's a lot of things that, that you would be responsible for across an entity, across a project. It's absolutely important that you have parts of your IT group embedded with these two, whether it's a technology person, it's a business analyst, and because they're part of your team, you can talk to them differently than you can talk to a shipping clerk or an AP person or somebody like that. You can ask them and you can just say to them, okay, give me, hey, you're part of my team. I trust you 100%. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what the issues are, and they'll understand that they need to be forthwith talking back to you. And then you go back to the initial question was, the staff person, the logistics person, the AP person, who some are very well versed in what you're trying to do, and some are just hanging on, trying to understand and get to the next day. It's to make sure that they understand they're part of the team, they're important. And it's just like any meeting that you go to, meeting that you're involved with. It's important that you don't let anybody in the meeting sit there and be silent. You can't let them be silent. You've got to. It's inherent upon you as the person who's running the meeting or running a project team to draw those people in. Because if you try to draw them in and they just absolutely refuse, they don't need to be on the team anymore. You've got to find somebody else. They can't just be there to get out of working, so to speak. So you've got to make sure that they're part of the team. They're important. There's the old axiom again of there's no bad question. Ask a question. There's just the only bad part is not asking the question. So ask questions. Your view on something is something that possibly no one else has thought about because you're important. You're there for a reason.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's sort of empowering them, valuing them. In some cases, we've also seen it work to educate them a little bit more up front, so they don't feel like they're experts necessarily, but they don't feel like they're playing catch up as much as
right. And it sometimes positions them for the future too, because it's not just a technology future that they have. When you're going through these transitions, anybody who tells you that people's jobs aren't going to change they've got ulterior motives. People's jobs are going to change. That's all there is to it. Some for the good, some for the bad. That's just what it is. But if you have people involved on a project team, let's say from, again, logistics, AP, whatever, you can help them if that's what they want. You can help them position themselves for future opportunities, whether it's a bigger, better role with a new product you're implementing, or a bigger, better role doing something else because they've started to show themselves. they've become, more vocal and more confident in themselves. And it's how you build that backlog of staffing that you're going to need in the future because you're going to lose people during any type of transition. There's going to be people that say, no, I don't want to do this. Sometimes critical people to the organization who've been there a while. I've had people who've been there 10, 15, 20 years, and people thought that the business would fall apart if they left, which is great for the staff. I mean, great for the person, but they just didn't want to change because their job was going to change, and they left. And you need to have people, your I don't like to say it this way, but your B team that's going to step up to be the A team.
Right.
I'm a proponent of always having A, Bs, and Cs in your organization so that you can grow them, because there's always an opportunity, always positions that only need a C person to do them. Don't need an A person to do a C job. But it's it positionally allows you to put people in those that can grow. And a way you do that is through transition like this. You make sure that they're important. They know they're important. They know that they're part of the team. They're not there just because we needed headcount. Their input is valued. Even if you got to take them aside and talk to them and say, hey, you're not really offering anything. You don't have any ideas. And sometimes that opens them right up. Once it gets one-on-one, it'll open the people right up and say, okay, next time, just bring that up. I'll support you in it. I'll make sure that I'll support you when you bring that up. And it helps to open people up and be part of the process.
Yeah, it's almost like you're giving them permission, and they just need to feel like, hey, you want my input.
Absolutely.
That's all I need to hear.
Absolutely.
So, if you were just to sort of wrap this all up or bring it all full circle here, if you were advising a company that was just beginning their ERP implementation, I imagine there's many listening here right now that are just early in the stages of the first stages of their project, or they haven't even started yet. What's the one piece of advice, or maybe one or two pieces of advice you'd give to those people just starting out?
Well, there's a number, but probably the top of it is to validate the reason why you're doing it. Really understand why. Okay. And if it's to, as you'd mentioned a couple of times, streamline processes, acquisitions, human capital. We've got too many people we're paper-based, so we want to automate it. Understand the why. And you need to get that why, not just from you personally, especially if you're on the technology side, because you see things so differently than the business side, most cases, unless you've been in the business units. Technology people tend to get myopically focused on technology. But try to get that from outside your personal view, with interviews with the executive team, possibly with business unit directors, look for pain points. But then also the second point of this is to make sure absolutely you will fail if you don't have executive sponsor that is going to support this through the thick and thin, through the good part and the bad part, because there will be bad parts. There's anybody again who tells you this is all cupcakes and rainbows, it's not going to happen. Okay.
Right.
There's going to be challenges. You're going to probably take a step back. I've always found that myself personally, when I develop project timelines, I always buffer into them time periods that if I think something's going to take, it's going to take us 6 months to do this, it's going to turn into 9 months on a project plan, because that always happens that way. But then again, it could turn into 12 months, but but it's absolutely critical that you get executive sponsorship from the highest executive you have in your organization, if possible, to make sure that they're aligned and they're on board with the project itself, the reason for it, and understanding there's going to be pain points. There's going to be issues. I had an executive, senior executive, one of the two owners of the company, tell me point blank, okay, we can do this, but there can't be any disruption to production or operations. Zero impact. And I said, then we can't do it.
Yeah.
I was honest with them. I said, oh, we can't, because I don't know. Well, what's going to be impact? I don't know at this point. All I know historically is there will be. That's just what happens. You may lose a critical person on the team, either from the outside group or internal, that's going to throw it off. You may have, you may buy another company. And that's happened before. We've acquired another company that we want onboarded before these other ones. Okay, well, here's the impact. So it's critically important that those two things that are most important to me: understand the why and the executive sponsorship.
It's great advice. And that zero impact is a very unrealistic yet common expectation from executives. They want that reassurance that this is going to be easier than it really is going to be.
Or and I'm sort of chuckling a little bit here, or it's you come up with a timeline for it, like for this business unit, it's going to take 9 months to do. Oh, you can't. You got to do it in 3. Well, okay, right. No, and it's hard it's tremendous. I'm sure you've walked away from projects because they've been unrealistic. It's difficult when you're an internal employee to tell an owner of the company, sorry, we can't do this. We can do this if you give me every you have that I ask for, no questions asked, to be part of the team. But you can't do that because then it's going to impact the business, because they don't have a backup. They don't have a human capital backup plan, and they don't want to hire people that potentially they're going to have to let go at the end of the project because you're double staffing or third staffing again to do this, which you need. So you've got to balance that. But I've had multiple executives say, well, no, I had at this one company I was at before you were involved, they had a goal to change all of this. Is when they had 7 business units. They wanted to take the business units and make them all on the same ERP system. And their methodology was, even though the business units were totally different in their manufacturing processes and their internal developed processes, they wanted to do one unit, take like 6 months to one unit, take all the lessons learned in the processes, drop them into a next unit and have it done in 30 days. And then the next one in 30 days, the next one in 30 days. And I came on board when they were starting, and I said, that you can't do that. I almost was off-boarded real quick, but I said, you can't do that. It's just, if you talk to the people, do you understand what they do? Well, yeah, they make bathtubs. Well, okay.
Right.
This is plastic. This is enamel. This is metal. This is this. It's totally different processes.
Yeah. Did you get highly tenured people that had been there for longer than you, saying like, who's this guy? Why do we hire this guy to come in and tell us we can't?
Absolutely. We brought him on for this.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to tell us no on day one. What's that about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in one thing I've seen work too, just as a sort of a side note on that, is if you give people that 9 months versus 3 month example you just gave, it's going to take 9 months, but they say, no, I want it done in 3. A lot of times what I found to be successful is rather than necessarily saying no, I'll say, okay, you want to see what 3 months looks like? Here's what it looks like. Yeah. And, you kind of lay out what that exactly looks like. And basically you're painting a picture of a train wreck that is not going to go well. And it's going to be a lot of risk, a lot of disruption, which I know you said this executive didn't want, or this executive team didn't want. So you sort of have to put it to them frame it in that way and say, but totally your choice, whichever option I don't recommend that option, but I do recommend the 9 month option. But if you do decide to go that path, here's what it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I appreciate your time here today, Walter. Great stuff.
Enjoy
Got a lot to share. You've been through a lot of stuff, a lot of battle scars and battle wounds from all of the projects you've done over the years. So really appreciate you sharing these insights.
Yeah. Anybody on the call, if they've got any other questions or anything like that, go through Eric. Eric will get them to me.
Yep. And if you're on LinkedIn, be sure to connect with Walter there. Again, it's Walter Kolodziey, and I'll let you pronounce that, or not pronounce it, but spell it if you don't mind your last name, just so everyone has it, Walter.
Kolodziey. Odziey.
Perfect.
Very easy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like it sounds, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much for being here, and really appreciate it. And hope to have you again, because I feel like I think we said before we started here today we could spend 2, 3, 4 hours on this topic easily and still not get through everything. So
Appreciate the opportunity, and thanks everybody for joining.
yeah, thanks to the audience too. Thanks for the great questions. Again, we'll edit this, we'll polish it up, we'll add some additional content, we'll make it part of our next episode of Transformation Ground Control that'll be released next week. Every Wednesday, new episodes come out, so go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to keep up with that podcast. And every Tuesday, we do these same time, same place. Although I shouldn't say every Tuesday. 50 out of 52 Tuesdays a year I do it. The next 2 Tuesdays are the 2 that I don't do it every year. So anyway, so look forward. We'll resume these live discussions here again in June. But in the meantime, hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you next time.